More than 2 miles deep on the ocean bed, Titanic is giving up her secrets. But there's one she has kept locked away. That of the children who died. While others watched from lifeboats as fathers and loved ones went down with the stricken ship. This is their story of children on the Titanic.
Merry Christmas! December the 25th, 1912. A year since I began writing the journal that Father gave me last Christmas, when he broke the wonderful news. We were going to live in Canada, at a place called Saskatchewan. And he had booked our voyage across the Atlantic Ocean on the newest, biggest and best ship in the whole wide world. If only we'd not had to leave him behind.
Children on the Titanic with Hollie as Betty, a character whose story is based on the true accounts of children who survived the most infamous maritime disaster of the 20th century. Their stories are told in their own words.
There are so many people in the freezing cold water, and I will never forget the sound of their screams and groans.
One person's died in our lifeboat, and they were wrapped in a sheet and slipped overboard.
One of the girls gave her shawl to the stoker who was rowing, because he was only wearing a vest and shorts as he had been working in the hot boiler room.
They've picked up hundreds of survivors, but we've looked all over the ship and can't find Father anywhere.
But just how many young lives were lost to the pride of the White Star Line?
It's April 1912, and that was the maiden voyage of the Titanic. So children and families will be getting all their possessions ready, going down to Southampton and preparing to embark on this great ship which they'd read so much about in the newspapers. You want to go to a new life, and we're better than on this brand new ship.
Our great adventure began when Father saw an article about a shoe shop for sale in the wonder city of Saskatoon in Canada. He says it's a giant country, much bigger than England, with forests and lakes as big as seas, and even grizzly bears. It takes a whole week to get to New York, so I will make new friends on the boat and in Canada. But I will miss Fred, who everyone knows is sweet on me.
This is the era of mass immigration, where millions of families will live in the old world and hopefully starting a new wonderful life in the new world of America. And of course, the families brought their children with them. So the ship is actually full of young people who are going to set off themselves. In first class, for instance, you've got something like 6 young people there. In second, about 25. But in third, where most of the immigrants are, you have 85 children. But there are children working on this ship as well. You could start your career on a merchant vessel as young as 13. And on this ship, you had young people working as bellboys, possibly working as trimmers, and working as lift attendants. 2,200 people or so on board this vessel, and what a way to start your new life.
My ticket to New York cost a whole £26 and 5 pence, more money than I have seen in my whole life. Father took me to Liverpool to get the tickets, and we saw the most incredible model of the Titanic.
When children saw this model, they must have been in awe of it. This was the biggest ship in the world. It was something that you really wanted to shout from the rooftops about. And this model, in the days before videos, in the days before the internet and all the modern TV and broadcasting items, the only way you could promote things was to show things physically to people of all ages who would be travelling on this great ship. Because you've got to remember, Titanic catered for the mass market. That means all sorts of people would have used Titanic to go to new lives in America. So that was the purpose of the model, was to sell the ship.
So children, this is Canada, and this is where Betty's going to live. Can anyone tell me how she'll cross the Atlantic Ocean? Yes, Billy?
In a boat, miss.
That's right, she's going on a boat. What's the boat called, Betty?
The Titanic, miss.
The Titanic. And it will set sail from Southampton and go all the way across the sea to New York.
Shipping lines would offer packages for passengers going over to America, not just to British and Irish people, but also all over Northern Europe. You would get people travelling to new lives from as far away as Russia. And they would actually travel from there, from Scandinavia, Germany, Denmark, at cheaper rates than they would from their own shipping companies. The White Star Line and Cunard were very good at offering a package, which of course still goes on to this day, doesn't it, in travel.
Now, New York is a huge city and quite different from any city that we have in England. It has very, very tall buildings called...
skyscrapers, miss.
That's right, they're called skyscrapers. And they're building one at the moment. It's called the Woolworth Building, and it is going to be the tallest building in the world. But if you were to stand the Titanic on end, it would be even taller than that. Can anyone tell me anything else about the Titanic?
Please, miss.
Yes, Fred.
My Uncle Bill sits.
Well, I think he might have had a little bit of help with that, Fred.
Well, quite a lot of help, actually. 15,000 men built this ship in Holland and Waltz in Belfast. It was clearly seen as the pride of Britain, and certainly was the pride of Ireland.
There would have been a whole ritual about emigration in those days, because it was a very, very big business indeed, and many, many hundreds of thousands of people were travelling all over the world. So what you would do is you'd go and say goodbye to your family, you'd go and say goodbye to your friends, because it was highly likely you would never see them again.
Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you.
Just think what it would be like to be a child at that time, leaving your family, your extended community behind, and setting off for a country that was totally alien to you. Children would have to say goodbye to grandparents and friends and neighbours and all their best friends at school.
You've been my best friend. Light glowing in your eyes, so true. Let me call you sweetheart. I'm in love with you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Everybody was captivated about the Titanic. The gymnasium, the swimming pool, the Turkish bath. A virtual floating city with the very latest mod cons.
They must have been very brave men to build the Titanic. Some were even killed. One was a boy who was not much older than me.
Some of the youngsters working on the Titanic were actually very young, but this was quite common across all of Britain. Young people across all factories could start as young as 13 and work upwards. Samuel Scott, for instance, worked at Holland Walls in Belfast, and at only 15 fell and was killed on his first day working on the ship. The paint was literally drying on the Titanic when it left Belfast to go to Southampton to start its maiden voyage. From there it would call at Cherbourg in France, and then finally at Queenstown before leaving for New York. And people from all over the world were travelling to meet the ship. One family, which was particularly interesting to me, came from the Lebanon and started out their journey by donkey.
Tuesday the 9th of April, and I've spent the last night in my own bed. Today, I say goodbye to Granny. She gave me a going away present. The most beautiful doll you ever saw. I called her Emily, which is Granny's name, so I will never forget her. I shall miss her most of all. I've opened all my leaving presents, and my things are all packed, except for the bigger toys in my doll's house, which I've had to leave behind. I'll make sure there's room for Emily, though. On the train to Southampton, I can't help wondering if I will ever see Granny again. Canada is another world.
Read all about it! The great ship on no set sail! Read all about it!
Imagine yourself as a child seeing the scene here at the dock, the largest ship in the world, towering high above you. And of course, you can hear noise from outside the pubs, where party atmosphere is going on as people have their last drink before boarding the ship. It is a thrilling time for a child. You have Russians, you have Scandinavians, Austro-Hungarians, all speaking their own languages. It's really the melting pot of Europe.
The melting pot of Europe, from places far beyond. Making friends, having fun, we sail across the pond. Oh, the melting pot of Europe, new friends from far beyond. American blues and tapping shoes, steady as she goes. Norwegian tales, songs from Wales, dance and singing shows. Highland fling, hear them sing, golden trumpet blows. The melting pot of Europe, new friends from far beyond. Time to eat and share a treat, food and fun for all. Canadian ham and Belgian jam, cheeses big or small. Swedish dish, Danish fish, France's pastry stall. The melting pot of Europe, new friends from far beyond.
I'll tell you all you need to know about the Titanic. Albert signed on as a stoker in the engine room. He's taken our lad Harry with him too, to get him started. Well, he is 14 now, all grown up. There's been such a fuss about the ship's size and all. Some of the crew have got a bad feeling about her maiden voyage. But these sailors, they're a superstitious lot, especially after I sold them a few pints. I tell them, don't worry about it. It'll be plain sailing all the way to New York, you mark my words.
Dear Granny, there was a big party at the boarding house tonight, and I sang for them. We met a family from Sweden, but there are so many people getting on the ship. I wonder if I will be able to find them again. Tomorrow is the big day.
The departure of Titanic was an incredibly colourful event. You were really made to feel you were an important person. There would have been a band playing, Rolls Royces, limousines, wealthy people in top hats, children in beautiful clothes. Then you had the poorer people who weren't as prominent because the rich people went up first of all up the gangplanks. Everything was an amazingly colourful, evocative scene. For children all over Europe, travelling in one of these great liners was really a very almost overwhelming experience.
A lot of children would have, when they were not at school, worked with their parents in industrial units, whether it was making chain or various other industries, to then journey down to Southampton to get on this floating palace would be a very different lifestyle to the gritty environment that they'd grown up in.
Some of them would never have seen the sea. You had to dispose of things you couldn't take with you, and of course, when you were young, when you were a child, a lot of your favourite toys would possibly have to be left behind. So it was really a great experience which many children and young people went through.
On April the 10th, sailing day, everybody was beginning to move towards the ship itself. Third-class passengers having to go through health inspection first before they were even allowed to board the ship. Cargo now being loaded over the heads of third-class passengers. But there was a sense of nervousness because crew was still signing on. Young members of the crew still getting on board the ship themselves, starting their first job in some cases.
A bellboy helped with our baggage, and he didn't look any older than me. He called me Madam. Little me. No one has ever called me Madam before. There are so many people working on this ship. It's bigger than our hometown and feels very safe.
Young crew members on board the ship would have a variety of tasks. Captain Smith himself started life in the Merchant Marine at the age of 13, and you started your career right at the bottom. You could be a trimmer right at the bells of the ship, you could be a bellhop looking after first-class passengers, or even if you got a bit more plum position, you could actually be a lift attendant.
First and second class was mainly wealthy people or business people. Most children travelled in third class or steerage. You would have had people from many different cultures. I mean, a lot of Turks, Russians, Germans, Scandinavians. They'd all be talking in their own language. They'd be communicating using sign language. They'd be producing food from their cases and from their packages, singing their own songs, because people in those days used to entertain themselves, and it would have been particularly noisy down in third class. It was quite simple accommodation. You would sleep in dormitories, families would be kept together, and so it was quite a simple way of travelling. Nothing luxurious, but that was where the shipping companies made their money, out of steerage.
My father, he says the Titanic is the biggest movable thing in the whole world. There's such a lot to see and do, so there's no danger that I'll be bored.
I can't believe it. Some of the passengers have brought their pets with them. There is a rich family in first class called Colonel and Mrs. Astor who have brought their pet dog, their personal nurse, and a maid.
There
is a little boy on this boat called William Carter. He's only 11 and he has his own manservant. Can you believe it?
First-class children, there was no official play area for them, but the Café Parisien would be cleared in the daytime so that the younger first-class children would be there with their nannies. I mean, they may not even see their parents till first thing in the morning and last thing at night.
Children are not allowed in the swimming pool or in the Turkish bath, but we from first class are allowed to the gymnasium at lunchtime, which is jolly decent.
Second-class children, well, their parents often stayed with them, and there is an image of a child playing with a spinning top on the deck itself.
The youngest passenger on the boat is a baby girl who is only 9 weeks old. She is such a pretty little thing. Her name is Elizabeth, but everybody calls her Melvina. I don't know why.
Third-class children, to them it's a whole playground as far as they can find it, with officers trying to drag them away from parts of the ship they're not supposed to be.
Children would have had all sorts of games which they would have played at home as well, things like hopscotch, skipping, marbles, things like that. But I think they would have also explored, and I think children had more freedom on Titanic than the adults did. And we know that on the great ships, children looked to, it was like going to a new town. You know, it's like going to a new town, a new community. There was so much to see, so many different levels to go to.
There were a group of boys in third class who were very mischievous, and they wandered all over the place. They even got into the boiler room itself. And legend has it that one of them managed to go up the fourth funnel, which is a dummy funnel, climb all the way to the top and peer his head over the end itself.
On our third day at sea, I played some games with two little boys who didn't speak any English. I thought they were French. Their father seemed very worried about them and took them back to their cabin. He seemed very strange. But I soon forgot about him. While I was reading in the ship's library, a man in smart uniform came in and asked where I was going. "We are going to Canada, but first we're going to land in New York." He smiled and said,
"Well, I'm pleased to hear that, young lady, because New York is where I'm going to."
It was Captain Smith himself. He was very kind and nice, and I liked his lovely white beard. The ship's food tonight was delicious. I had a soup called consommé. Then I had turkey with roast potatoes and cranberry jelly. It reminded me of Christmas and made me feel a bit homesick. Then I had coconut sandwich with American ice cream, which tasted exactly like English ice cream, I think. It's time for bed now, on a very calm and starry night. Shook, and I heard something, a thumping noise. I can hear people staring. I think the ship has stopped.
11:40 at night on April the 14th, passengers feel a sudden shudder to the ship itself. Children in first class who were tucked up nicely in their beds would have simply felt a general vibration. In second class, it would have been much the same, but in third class, depending whereabouts they were on the ship, they'd have felt something slightly more violent itself. Much more of a grinding sound.
It was late at night and gone to bed, but I was lying awake. There was a jolt, and the boat stopped moving. A steward knocked on the door and told us to get dressed and put on life preservers.
Mother asked the steward what had happened, why the engines had stopped. "We've had a little accident," he said.
They're going to fix it, and then we'll be on our way.
The next thing anyone would have known in first class would have been a polite knock to the door, where a first class steward would have been asking their parents to put on warm clothes and life jackets, and the children then would have been stirred out of their beds. Second, again, much of the same, but in third, it would be a thumping on the door with the steward screaming out, "Get your life jacket on, come out here!" And they would be then led out almost forcibly into a common area where they'd be mustered. And to be honest, very few people knew exactly what was going on at that moment in time.
But some people did know. They said we'd hit an iceberg and there were lumps of ice on the deck. My friendly bellboy whispered to me there was panic down below. There was a big hole in the hull and the sea was pouring in. But Father said not to worry. It can't be that serious if the ship's band is still playing.
Casey would waltz with the strawberry blonde and the band played on. He'd glide across the floor with the girl he adored and the band played on. His brain was so loaded it nearly exploded. The poor boy would shake with alarm. He'd never leave the girl with the strawberry curl and the band played on.
I had left my doll in our cabin and was crying for her, but no one would go back and get her. Then someone said, we should get into the boat. My father raised me in his arms and kissed me, and 2 men lifted me in. Then he kissed my mother, and she followed me into the boat.
He'd never leave the girl with the strawberry curl and the band played on.
Captain Smith was told by the ship's designer, who was taking the maiden voyage just to check that everything was working out, that the ship had only 2 hours to live. But for cosmetic reasons as much as anything else, the Titanic did not have enough lifeboat capacity for everyone on board. So he gave the order, women and children first. And the question is, who is it who's going to be released into the lifeboats?
They want us to get into the lifeboats, but not Father. Mother doesn't want us to leave him, but they say we have to go. Now!
Officers are shouting, women and children only. You've got to make that split decision of whether you put your child onto the lifeboat and stay with your husband. Do you go with your child? It must have been a terrifying moment for the women concerned.
At first, they wouldn't let me onto the lifeboat, as they said I was too old. Then I took off my straw hat, and after that, they let me onto the boat with my mother.
I didn't want to wear a life preserver, but then I saw that everyone else was wearing one, including all of the children. So Mother tied mine on me and I felt better.
One of the most interesting things about the Titanic is it is the final act of the great chivalrous era. Many men dressed in dinner suits and went for a last drink rather than attempt for a lifeboat. One person even made sure he didn't get into a boat so that children could be released, 2 children placed into a lifeboat.
There was a gentleman who was about to follow his pregnant wife onto the last lifeboat to leave the ship. He saw my brother and I rooted to the spot in terror and stepped aside so we got onto the boat instead. They tell me that the man who had given up his place to save 2 immigrant children was Lord Astor.
These men put women into lifeboats and then left. Benjamin Guggenheim is the finest example of this. He, with his valet, dresses in his best, and he says so. I've dressed in my best, and I'm prepared to go down as a gentleman, and then goes for a final drink. So you have husbands hugging their wives, giving them their final kiss. Young children are being handed over into the lifeboats by the fathers. The fathers, many of them realising they will never see their children again.
We're sailing west, brave new land, song and dance with fun far on. We're sailing west, let's hear the band. They say she can never fall. Women and children fast, but don't forget my father. Women and children fast, we'll meet him at the
The lowering of the lifeboat, 70 feet to the sea, is perilous. Nothing works properly, so that first one end of the lifeboat drops down, then the other. I'm really scared. There are so many people in the freezing cold water, and I will never forget the sound of their screams and groans.
They could hear people sobbing in the lifeboats. Some people were even starting to say prayers, but in different languages. So again, this mix of Europe came back to them. It suddenly dawned on them that we're alone in the open water.
I was in the lifeboat. In the stillness of the night, I could hear the band still playing on as we rowed away. One of the girls gave her shawl to the stoker who was rowing, because he was only wearing a vest and shorts as he had been working in the hot boiler room.
You're cold, you're bitterly cold, you can feel it biting into you. And then suddenly the lights flicker, they go out. And then suddenly you hear a grinding, roaring sound as the ship starts to break up and eventually disappear. But then in the water you're hearing the calls, the screams for people asking for the lifeboats to come back. Then after about 15 minutes, dead silence. And it is the silence which affects people, not the noise. It was a perfect starlit night. It's so dark, you can't identify people 3 places from you in the lifeboat itself.
I was frightened, and sometimes I cried. I cried hardest when I thought of my dolly back there in the water. No one to mind her, or keep her from getting wet.
Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own appointed limits keep. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea.
One person's died in our lifeboat, and they were wrapped in a sheet and slipped overboard. We've been out here for hours. It'll be a miracle if we're saved.
O Trinity of love and power, of family shield in danger's hour, from rock and tempest, fire and foe, protect us wheresoever we go. Thus evermore shall rise to thee glad hymns of praise from land and sea.
We drifted for hours. Then there were lights in the sky and distant booming sounds. At first we thought it was lightning and thunder. Then the crewmen rowing our boat said it could be rockets from the Carpathia coming to rescue us. At last there was hope. But where was Father? He must be on one of the other ships. When morning came, I looked around. It seemed to me like the Arctic. Huge icebergs ringed the horizon. Thank goodness the Carpathia has safely got through.
Children being small in an open boat have to be loaded now aboard the Carpathia. And in many cases the best way to load them was in cargo nets, which would drop down. They'd be wrapped in a sack, placed in a cargo net, and physically hauled 30, 40 feet on board this ship. An absolutely terrifying experience for a child who'd just experienced being in an open boat for all that time.
They've picked up hundreds of survivors, but we've looked all over the ship and can't find Father anywhere. They say there could be other rescue ships, so maybe he's on one of those. And what about the handsome young bellboy who called me Madam? There's no sign of him either.
Many younger members of the crew hadn't actually survived because they had to stand by their posts. The bellboys are the finest example of that. They simply went to their normal positions and waited. And nobody ordered them off duty. So they went down straight with the ship.
Read all about it! The Titanic sinks! Massive loss of lives! Read all about it!
Carpathia spent 2 to 3 days getting back to New York. First-class passengers simply went and were picked up by relatives in motor cars or even private trains. Second-class passengers found themselves finding into hotels, but for third-class passengers, they'd no one. They found themselves being taken care of by charity organisations, in mission rooms. They had nowhere to go, and they'd lost absolutely everything they owned.
I knew then that Betty and I were on our own, and my husband, my Frank, wouldn't be coming to meet us. We did travel on to Saskatchewan, and I'd hoped that I could carry out Frank's wishes and open the shoe shop. It was a beautiful place, but I couldn't manage without him. So we came back to England to be with Granny, and for Betty to be with her friends.
Well, those superstitious sailors were right to have their doubts, weren't they? I lost my Bert, and young Harry too. He was just a lad, really, too young to be away from his mum. And I still get money from the relief fund, but it's not enough, not with 4 mouths to feed. Half of Southampton are still in mourning, especially down Northern Way. Here at the docks, well, it's quiet for a while, but the ships still leave every day. America, Australia, South Africa. Life goes on.
In America, the newspapers wanted our story. They even chased us down the street one day with a camera, but Mother said no. She told us it's best that we speak to nobody about what happened. She said it would only make us remember, and we need to forget.
None of them really spoke about the Titanic until the first great research was being carried out by Walter Lord for his book A Night to Remember. And that's 40 years after the disaster. And only then did they feel happy to talk about the trauma and drama of that night on the North Atlantic.
If an incident happens today, children receive counselling and support and help. But back then, children were far stronger, far more robust. They were able to deal with these situations. They'd been used to seeing siblings possibly die in childhood, relations die, being laid out in the parlour. I think they would have probably dealt with it in a very different way to children of today.
We children were all sleeping on that fateful Sunday night, dreaming of a future filled with promise shining bright.
Ahead an iceberg looming, a frozen wall of death. For the lookouts at their station, the ice showed on their breath.
The ship sped through darkened waters towards her watery grave. There were only 20 lifeboats and so many lives to save.
Then the crow's nest the shout of danger. Alas, it came too late. The ice beneath the waterline sealed Titanic's fate.
Women and children first. The instruction was quite clear. So the men stood back and let us leave, despite their dread and fear.
We tightly hugged our fathers as we said our last goodbyes, and the music kept on playing, above our sobs and cries.
watched Titanic falter on that still and moonless night. We prayed for those we left behind as she slipped away from sight.
In the darkness and the silence, with the ship and records lost, we little knew how many lives, how great the human cost.
They said she was unsinkable, that she was big and strong. So then came the questions, to find out what went wrong.
And so from that day onward, more safety was the core, and class it should not matter, fairness for one and all.
Now, what was the last piece that the band played? Well, we believe it was Nearer My God to Thee. Eva Hart, who died only a few years ago, she was just 7 when the ship went down, and to her dying day, she said the band played that very moving hymn.
Of the 109 child passengers on board, 53 died, all but one of them from families in 3rd class, who arrived on deck to find most of the lifeboats had gone. We found out why the father of the French boys had seemed nervous. He'd kidnapped them from their mother and was running away with them to America. He stayed on board and drowned, but he threw his sons into a lifeboat. Eventually, they were reunited with their mother and they went back to France. And the youngest passenger, baby Elizabeth Dean, better known as Malvina, she became Titanic's last living survivor. She died in 2009 at the age of 97. But what about my friendly bellboy and the other young crew?
I have a theory that there were many more younger people working on the Titanic than is supposed. It was not uncommon in the merchant navy, in fact in factories as well for that matter, that fathers would bring their sons, they could be as young as 12, to work with them in their given trade. So we may never know how many children died on the Titanic. And in that I include those who by today's standards we would consider children, but at the time of the Titanic were considered adults.
Why do people still talk about it today? And the reason is, I think, is first of all, it was a terrible event and everything seemed to go wrong. There were many personalities, many colourful people on board Titanic. So there are lots of stories which we still tell to this day. And then, of course, it resulted in changes in the law. So it's now a lot safer to go to sea than it was before the Titanic. And for these reasons, we'll still remember the Titanic, I think, in another 100, 200 years' time.
We were also supremely confident. No one could have believed the Titanic could sink. We had that much confidence in the technology, something we must think about today with our modern technology, where we still have that complacency about it. If anything, the Titanic disaster teaches us never to be certain of anything.
As Christmas Day 1912 draws to a close, I remember every single second of those last moments with Father. I have a Christmas present for him, and I hope he can hear it. Boxes with ribbons and sweet-scented smells for birthdays and Christmas and when I do well. These are the gifts that everyone knows, carefully wrapped with their bright shiny bows. Presents and wonders all shiny and new, I would gladly exchange for just one glimpse of you. The gift I would wish for more than all the world wide is a hug from my daddy, now gone from my side. So many lives lost in this dark shining sea, and Daddy, my daddy, the most precious to me. When I'm here by the water, you are close to my heart. I can even forget we are forever apart. Now as a memory, your face lingers on, and I'll love you forever, although you are gone. I'm at peace here beside you, and this glistening sea. And I send you this poem as a last gift from me.